Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, March 18th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, anthropologist and author and fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, Jason Hickel, on The Divide, a brief guide to global inequality and its solutions. Also on the program today, Beto O'Rourke breaks the record, raises $6.1 million in a 24-hour period. His platform may take just a little bit longer to develop.
People in this country.
Just to put that in context, Barack Obama made a fraction of that. And of course, Bernie came pretty close as well. Report reveals that a GOP fundraiser was raided by federal investigators in a possible Republican money laundering probe dealing with the Trump administration.
What?
Meanwhile, University of Tennessee offers free tuition for students of families with income of less than $50,000. Colorado gets us to 181 out of 270 in the National Popular Vote Interstate Pact. Bernie Sanders campaign staff unionize. Trump administration assaulting the Affordable Care Act via the states. Ohio, now the latest to add Medicaid work requirements. Meanwhile, it's as easy as that. New Zealand likely to ban semi-automatic weapons. And the fascist Bolsonaro greeted by Donald Trump at White House, to the boon of comedians going on college campuses. U.S. to leave 1,000 troops in Syria. Is Mad Dog mad about that? And 1,000 reportedly killed in a Mozambique cyclone. All this and more on today's program. You'll recall that Mad Dog, I can't even remember his last name now. Mattis was fired, resigned because we were not leaving 1,000 troops in Syria. Turns out we are, and now we have no Secretary of Defense. So there's that. If I thought there was actually, I can definitely imagine a world where I would be happy that we don't have a Secretary of Defense. But I don't think that this is that world. We're living in a different world than that one. Another story I want to just highlight, just because, we talk about antitrust, people ask, how would you break up various entities? This is another example of where antitrust falls down in the United States. Spotify is suing Apple in the EU over the way that Apple treats its apps in the App Store. Right? You have a huge percentage of the market in terms of apps goes through the Apple App Store. And you cannot introduce an app that doesn't give Apple a cut of every sale that you make. And now, of course, it's not an issue with Apple Music, right, which is a competitor to Spotify. But I can tell you that part of the reason why it's taken us so long to get our app up there is because even though we were not selling memberships, we couldn't even link back to our website with the majority FM. So, without giving Apple a cut, we may end up just doing it because they seem to know that we're selling memberships somewhere. And so we may end up giving them a cut, but that's like extortion, sort of. Now, I guess we could put our Apple app on a different platform if we could, but we can't. So they have created this closed system. They've gotten big enough now where some 50%, maybe more, of our audience uses an iPhone or an iPad. So this is an example of what a rigorous antitrust would do. This is anti-competitive. I don't know how you would compute whether this is cheaper for the consumer or not, but that's not the point. It is anti-competitive. It undermines innovation and broadening the economy, and of course, it consolidates political power as you increase the economic power as well. Meanwhile, on the campaign trail, as you know, Beto raised $6.1 million. He is still sort of rolling out some of his key proposals, and it's on the other end of, I don't know if this is really the other end of the spectrum, maybe on the other end of the age spectrum, but very much aligned, I think, when we talk about sort of the political lanes that exist. Beto's positions have changed quite dramatically in really just like the last term of the Obama administration, frankly. And here is another guy who's apparently his politics have also radically changed. We just haven't been able to see them in the exact same, that change as carried out. Here is Joe Biden trying to argue that he is more progressive or as progressive as every candidate in the race, the presidential race. That part of the claim is getting less attention, it seems, than his inability to hide the fact that he's running. Whatever. I mean, he had a gaffe like this that supposedly led to marriage equality, frankly, and so I'm not too concerned about him being gaffe prone, and maybe he made that gaffe so that he could get the other claim in without scrutiny. But let's face it, folks, this is not a guy. He should run on what he's running on, which is that he talks like your old Irish uncle, if you have one. But here he is making a speech claiming that the new left is really, they don't know what they're talking about.
I know I get criticized. I'm told I get criticized by the new left. I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the United, if anybody who would run. I didn't mean with anybody who would run.
Now they're all cheering because they want him to run. And now, I just want to ask this question. I am not a Catholic, and I have seen sports figures across themselves. I don't know exactly how to do it. I don't mean to. I'm not being facetious about that. And I've seen sports figures do it as a way of thanking God. But what does Joe Biden do in these situations? He did this. He also had a similar joke with, and every time he brings up the fact that he's being criticized from the new left, I guess that means feminists. I guess that means folks who are concerned about, people of color who are concerned about his past positions on race.
Anita Hill.
Anita Hill, I think feminists. I mean, a lot of people don't
who
realize
don't
People who
lobby.
need
there were
healthcare.
a lot of people don't realize there were 3 women who would have corroborated at least, if not the specific story that Anita Hill had, aspects of the behavior of Clarence Thomas that he would not allow to testify. And people could be talking about, Social Security advocates and this and that, but I don't know who he's talking about as New Left. But he's done this before, where when he was talking about when he promoted a Republican in the 2018 election, and he said, "I got criticized, and forgive me, Father, I've sinned," and he crosses himself again. Like, are Catholics okay with him using that symbol for God as a way of, like, because he's being sarcastic, right? Like, he's not actually asking God or his priest for forgiveness. He's basically joking, like, "Oh, I've committed a really bad sin."
It's called the Immeditio Dei Psyche de Christi. It's a joke.
Well, but the joke he's making is, I've committed a really bad sin, and so I'm going to pretend I'm asking God for forgiveness because that's how bad the sin is. Like, are Catholics? I'm just asking. I'm not a Catholic. I don't think as a Jew, if we had anything like that, it wouldn't bother me. But I wonder, are Catholics really think it's that funny that he's pretending that
Matt,
that God?
you think it's funny?
I think Catholics just would like to see the sign of the cross up there.
Right.
Yeah. You're
What is-
yeah. That's my
So they
What
instinct.
does Brendan
They don't
think?
care that it's like being done in vain or anything like that.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Because he's clearly just doing it as like, I'm making a joke, and so I can keep
Catholics were the
leaning on
first
the
irony
All right.
bros, Sam.
Just checking that out. I don't know, because it occurred to me. I was like, I don't know. Is that like he's really? I get it. I get the joke.
Hey, do 5 fake Hail Marys and get out of here.
Right. There's a little bit of that. Anyways, there's Joe Biden. He has yet to announce. He will soon. Somebody suggested that he was waiting until we get past so he doesn't have to report his fundraising until 3 months later. You got to report at the end of every quarter.
He's not a very bright individual.
Because
Well,
I'm smart.
Well, it
It
could be a
is-
smart thing to do.
It's very fitting for him to announce his candidacy in a gaffe. So,
Yes.
way to
like I
stay
say.
on brand, Joe.
I'm on brand.
Folks, has your company outgrown QuickBooks? Are shared spreadsheets, manual processes, and legacy systems costing you time and money? Introducing NetSuite by Oracle, the business management software that handles every aspect of your business in an easy-to-use cloud platform. With NetSuite, you can save time, money, and unneeded headaches by managing sales, HR, and finance and accounting instantly right from your desk or even your phone. Thousands of the best-known and fastest-growing companies use NetSuite to manage their businesses, and now it's available to you. Better yet, it's more affordable than you think. Because right now, NetSuite is offering you valuable insights to help you overcome the obstacles that are holding you back, free. Don't miss out on unleashing your business's full potential with this free guide, Crushing the 5 Barriers to Growth.
Bro. Say no more.
Michael's already on that. You'll learn how to acquire new customers, increase profits, finally get real visibility to your cash flow. Get NetSuite's guide, Crushing the 5 Barriers to Growth, Michael, at NetSuite. At netsuite.com/majority. Now, that's netsuite.com/majority to download their free Crushing the 5 Barriers to Growth guide today. netsuite.com/majority. Folks, want you to know that today the Majority Report is supported by Pitchfork Economics with Nick Hanauer, a weekly podcast that explores why everything you learned in Econ 101 was wrong, and why, if we don't get economics right, the pitchforks are coming. Every week on Pitchfork Economics, zillionaire investor Nick Hanauer. I don't know if he's a zillionaire, but he is a multi-millionaire. We've had him on this program a couple of times. Maybe he's a billionaire. Is joined by some of the world's most original economic thinkers in a convention-busting exploration of who gets what and why in the American economy. Pitchfork Economics explains why a $15 minimum wage is actually good for business, why taxing the rich spurs economic growth, and why a thriving middle class is the primary cause of prosperity. Senator Cory Booker explains why curbing corporate greed would actually be good for corporations and the economy. Historian Yuval Harari explains how those in power use storytelling to shrink your paycheck. And economist Stephanie Kelton scolds Democrats for worrying too much about how we're going to pay for things and not enough about what we need to do. Good for her. Saw her at the Bernie rally, incidentally. Hung out, spoke to her for a while.
Cool.
In Brooklyn. If you want to learn how to make the economy work for all Americans and not just the wealthy few, subscribe to Pitchfork Economics at pitchforkeconomics.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Sometimes I quote Nick Hanauer. He was the one who said, a rich man eats only one loaf of bread a day. Harry's founders were tired of paying up for razors that were overpriced and over-designed. And that's why Harry's introduced Harry's razors. And that's why when I shave, which I try and do as little as possible, I also need a haircut, badly, I use Harry's.
There's been comments.
Yeah. Have there been comments?
On the YouTube,
Yeah. I need a haircut. I know.
Take your job a little bit more seriously.
I know it. But Harry's knows that a great shave doesn't come from gimmicks like vibrating heads, flex balls, or handles that look like spaceships. I'm so glad that they write that, because honestly, it looks like Rambo designed half of these shavers. So they First Blood, that's good actually. So they bought a world-class blade factory in Germany and started making razors that combine a simple, clean design with quality, durable blades at a fair price. Harry's replacement cartridges are just $2 each. And all of Harry's blades come with a 100% quality guarantee. It's no surprise that they've received over 20,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot and Google. We're going to check out that Trustpilot. Have you ever gone there?
Mm-mm.
It's like a review site?
No.
I haven't seen that. Nevertheless, if I were to go on there and set up an account, they'd have 21,000 five-star reviews, because I would give them one. Get a $13 value trial set that comes with everything you need for a close, comfortable shave. You get the weighted ergonomic handle. You get the 5-blade razor with a lubricating strip and the, I like to think, Sam Seder designed trimmer blade to fit in his asymmetric nostrils, the rich lathering shave gel, the travel blade cover. Listeners of my show can redeem their trial set at harrys.com/majority report. Make sure you go to harrys.com/majority report to redeem your offer. Let them know that I sent you to help support the show. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Dr. Jason Hickel, author, anthropologist, and fellow at the Royal Society of Arts, who wrote a book in, I think it was 2018, on The Divide, a brief guide to global inequality and its solutions. We'll be right back after this. We are back, Sam. ago where there was not this type of disparity, right? I mean, we were the global north and the global south did not have this type of disparity. What started to develop that disparity?
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say, because if we go back 500, even only 200 or 300 years, what we see is that this disparity didn't exist, A, and also B, that we see in crucial areas in the global south, we see that people are actually better off in many ways than people in the global north are, right? With longer life expectancies, better nutrition, better income, and so on. And so that's really interesting. So what we see over this period is a dramatic reversal of fortunes. And that effectively happens through the colonial process, whereby people across the global south are dispossessed from their lands, effectively rendered as sources of cheap labor for industry for the north, basically, and also sources of raw material for the Industrial Revolution. And so, what's also interesting is that the Industrial Revolution, and economic historians are clear about this, could not have happened without that colonial process. It couldn't have happened without the slave trade, without enclosure and dispossession across the South, without cotton and sugar, grown in the South, and so on. So this relationship between the North and the South was really essential for this kind of enrichment of the North. But the consequence of that was, of course, that the South was prevented from advancing in the same way.
And we should be clear here, right? Because it's not just a question of that the resources were it was the means in which the resources were taken from. This wasn't a trade, right? I mean, when we talk about at this level, we're talking about things like slavery. We're talking about intense violence. We're talking about occupation and subjugating of indigenous people, and we're just talking about empire, really.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some key elements, I think, that people are not normally aware of. One is the fact that the global South was used as a kind of captive market for the overproduction of manufactured goods in the global North, right? So with the rise of industrialization in the North, what we see is that there's this immense overproduction of goods that have to find a market somewhere. And you can't have continuous growth until they do, otherwise you have a kind of financial crisis. And so the global South was sort of roped into being a captive market for those goods. But the only way to make that work was for colonizers to actively dismantle domestic industries in the South, right? Textile industries, and et cetera, in order to make sure that there was no competition for their goods. And this was often done, very forcibly. Like the Opium Wars are a great example of this, where Britain wanted and France wanted access to China's markets. China said, no, we have all that we need. Thank you very much. Your goods are kind of shoddy anyway. Please go away. And Britain and France, responded by invading China and forcing their markets open to be sort of this pressure valve for their overproduced goods. So in every way, the extraction of resources on the one hand, but also on the other hand, the sale of manufactured goods. Those two elements of the Industrial Revolution depended on this violent relationship with the global South.
And so it's wealth extraction or resource extraction, and then it's also, I guess, undermining of any capacity to use their own resources, to refine their own resources to make finished goods, because they needed to be markets for those resources that have been extracted and then refined and then sold back to them.
That's right, yeah. And to me, this is a really powerful story, and one that most people are not aware of, because the dominant narrative that we have out there is that, how did the Industrial Revolution come about? Well, it happened because, you had these brilliant scientific minds in England who invented things like, the steam engine and so on, right? So, and it's only because of sort of the scientific, expertise of Englishmen, and also their good institutions and so on, that industrialization was able to happen. But in fact, that's just, that completely erases the relationship that England and the rest of the global North had with the South, which, again, it's very clear that relationship was necessary for the possibility of industrialization in the first place. And a lot of people died in that process, right? And the British intervention in India itself led to tens of millions of people who were killed needlessly due to famine, because of the way that colonizers organized their agricultural policy in order to extract cash crops from India and to feed London.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because I've actually just done an interview that we're going to run, I think, during vacation, about that very dynamic where the nature of that type of approach on a resource extraction ends up creating, in this case, it was the Dust Bowl in the United States, but we've had sort of Dust Bowl events around the country. But just if you could get a little bit more granular when we talk about how that resource extraction sort of functions, not only to be taken violently out of there, but also to leave the country fundamentally sort of arrested in some way because of the trauma of the way that was extracted.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take India as an example, since I was just talking about that. So when the British colonizers arrived in India, sort of their main intervention was to try to transform the agricultural system from one that was organized around subsistence, right, to one that was organized around exporting cash crops. Okay. And the way they did that basically was the problem they faced was that local people were unwilling to make this transition voluntarily because they were quite content with their existing economic arrangements, right? And so somehow they had to be coerced into making the transition. And the way that the British did that was by dispossessing them from their lands, so that they would have no choice, but to work on these kind of agribusiness farms for export. Or otherwise face starvation, or imposing sort of these debt relationships on them that required them to acquire, foreign currency in order to pay the debts back, right? Or by destroying, key social welfare mechanisms they had to make sure they were vulnerable to drought. In all of these cases, the objective was to sort of create scarcity, to sort of induce the threat of hunger, and that would drive people into the capitalist labor market. And that same process unfolded not only in India but across most of the global South, and that's what we call enclosure. And that was a key dynamic for that process of extraction.
Now, is that how sort of calculated is that, or is it simply like we go in, we have a narrow agenda, we find that it leads to X, Y, and Z? Or how much of it is that sort of like a calculated idea when the colonial powers enter a country?
Oh yeah, it was very calculated actually, and we can see this in the writings of key theorists of the colonial encounter actually, right? So, and interestingly, the idea was first developed in England during the enclosure period in the medieval years. And the idea there was, again, we can force peasants to sort of compete with each other and be productive on enclosed farms for rich people by putting them at the mercy of hunger, right? So taking away their access to the commons, to land and to forests and to fish and game and so on. And so the exact same process was used then in Ireland, which is the first British colony, but then also in India and across Southern Africa. And not just by the British, but by other colonizers as well. And the consequences were devastating. And this is important because we have this, again, there's another narrative out there that colonialism was in some way kind of an economic benefit to the colonized. But exactly the opposite is true. And again, if we take India.
Jason, I'm sorry, can you just speak a little bit more directly into the phone? We're just losing you a little bit.
Oh, sorry about that, yeah.
That's it. Okay.
So again, if we take India, we see that there's zero increase in real per capita income during the colonial period, the entire 200-year period of British rule, right? And there's actually a decline in life expectancy in the latter part of British rule, et cetera. So we really see that colonization depleted the lives of the colonized in crucial ways, but for the sake of the development of the North. And that process played out all over the world.
And we should say that to be subjected to this over the course of 200 years, you are fundamentally altering the culture, right? You're fundamentally altering the trajectory of the life of that country.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And one of the clearest ways you see that is the sheer mass of extracted wealth that was drained from the global South, right? So with India alone, to use this example again, Britain drained in the region of $45 trillion from India during the colonial period. Now, that is money that they could have used not only for their own incomes and well-being, but for reinvestment in development, right? In the same way that Japan was able to use their own foreign exchange earnings to build up a robust, rich economy. So too, India could have done the same thing, but they were prevented from doing so over hundreds of years, for the sake of extraction to the north.
Okay, so that story is one. That's the story of India, but that story is essentially one that plays out across the global South, as it were.
That's right. We see the same story happening across Africa, happening across Latin America. And again, it's not just Britain, but also other colonizers use the same tactics effectively. That's
okay,
right.
So then
now what's interesting.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, please.
I was going to say what's interesting is what happens after the end of colonization, though, because the story really does change quite dramatically.
Right. Well, that's where I wanted to go. So then we get to this era in presumably in the 1950s, which we start to recognize as a post-colonization era, and theoretically, right, this is all ended, but no.
Oh, well, what's interesting is we have a couple of decades in the wake of decolonization that are actually pretty extraordinary. So you have these newly independent nations with democratically elected governments that were on the whole quite progressive, right? They were more or less leftist progressive governments, and they were rolling out what we call developmentalist reforms. They were reversing all of the structures that had existed under colonialism. So they were redistributing lands to make sure that peasants had access to the land they needed to grow food. They were improving labor rights and improving wages. They were introducing capital controls to prevent capital flight from multinational companies. They were investing in public services like healthcare and education. They were nationalizing key resources like oil and gold and things like that. And it was working really, really well. During the 50s, 60s, and 70s, per capita income grew at an astonishing rate, 3.2% per year. They succeeded in beginning to reduce poverty. They were closing the gap between the global South and the global North. It was really an extraordinary era. And I think that, we've forgotten about that too easily. And not only that, but global South countries were uniting with one another to build bonds of solidarity, to argue for a fair global economy in the UN. And in 1973, managed to pass this extraordinary document called the New International Economic Order, which demanded effectively that they be allowed to control their own economic policy and their own national interests without fear of being invaded and recolonized by global North countries. It was an extraordinary time. But what's interesting about this is that global North countries, the former colonizers, were not at all happy about it, as you can imagine. Because they were suddenly losing their access to the cheap labor and cheap raw materials and open markets that they had secured during the colonial period. And so they reacted by, in many cases, violently deposing these progressive governments, one after the other, on many occasions through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, trying to reverse their progressive policies and restore their access to the cheap labor and raw materials they enjoyed under colonialism.
Okay, and
in many cases...
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
In many cases, the U.S. was actually was instrumental in this. Actually, this is where the U.S.'s role as a kind of neo-colonial power becomes really crucial. Like the U.S. was behind the coup that deposed the progressive leader of Iran, the first democratically elected progressive leader of Iran. They were behind a number of coups across Latin America, including in Guatemala, in Brazil. They were behind the coup that deposed Sukarno in Indonesia. And Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973, over and over again, the U.S. joined forces with former colonial nations to depose progressive leaders and roll back their economic reforms.
And we should say that often this is in conjunction with very specific corporate interests in the various regions, right? Like when we talk about Central America, you had the United Fruit Company or ITT and oil companies in Iran, and these were all they were all basically they were all corporate interests that drove this, because presumably they're the ones who are on the front lines of getting these natural resources, extracting these natural resources, and then theoretically, I guess, selling it back to these places.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the progressive policies that I was talking about, quite often directly negatively affected American companies, right? So land reform, affected American fruit companies that had these enormous land holdings, most of which were not even used, but they held them nonetheless. And so when those were redistributed back to the peasants from whom they were taken, the fruit companies were obviously extremely upset. The same is true of, telecommunications companies that had been controlled by U.S. companies, oil, et cetera. So when these companies and resources were nationalized, then the American companies that used to hold those resources, those assets, were obviously pissed off. And so they went to the CIA and they said, look, we need your help in sort of deposing these progressive leaders. And, honestly, I think that it's a real shame that Americans have forgotten about this era. This incredibly destructive legacy of coup-mongering, right? And it's important to remember, because it's one of the reasons why people in the global South, do have anti-American sentiments, right? Because their democratically elected leaders who promised, justice for their people in the wake of colonialism, were overthrown and replaced by vicious dictators that were backed by the U.S. and former colonial powers, right? When Patrice Lumumba, the first elected leader of the Congo, was assassinated in 1961 by the U.S., he was replaced by Mobutu, a cartoonishly violent dictator who controlled the country in American interest for the next 30 years and just drove it completely into the ground. I mean, that makes people, embittered and angry.
I mean, the amazing thing too about this part of the story is that we go around the world and look at places that are, problematic in some. Look, everywhere is problematic, but sort of like in sort of arguably crisis, right? We overthrow most of 60, 70 years ago, and we're still talking about Iran today as perhaps invading them. We talk about the destabilization in Central America, and everything in the news today is about kids. Families, even cops, trying to get out of these countries because of the level of violence, the destabilization. We have this ongoing thing in Venezuela that is eerily similar, as Guaido announces that he's getting ready to somehow he's going to reprivatize the oil companies. So this is a playlet that we that has long-term repercussions. So what happens after that era where we attempt to sort of like recolonize, sort of a soft recolonization, I guess? We get to just another even softer recolonization than that, right?
Yeah. So what happens after this period is that in 1980 there's basically a global debt crisis that's triggered by the fact that the chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker, dramatically raises interest rates on the U.S. dollar. And because most global South loans at the time were denominated in dollars, this makes their debts basically unpayable. And so, we're talking about interest rates of like 20%. And so they slid to the brink of default. And Western banks, which were overexposed to these toxic debts, were like, look, if they default, then we're going to collapse, and we can't let that happen. So they went to the U.S. government and said, look, what can you do to help us? And the U.S. government bailed them out, by forcing global South countries to cut public spending, to privatize their resources, and use all of that money to pay back debts. So global South countries were basically plundered for the sake of debt repayment to these overexposed, bankrupt banks on Wall Street. This is very similar to what happened in 2008, and it's important. It's important to understand that this tactic was first tried in the 1980s very effectively, and what this did is it, in one fell swoop, allowed creditor countries like the U.S. Through the World Bank and the IMF to control economic policy in Global South countries, forcing them to roll back their developmentalist reforms that had been so successful for them, okay, denying them the very policies they needed for real development and poverty reduction. And as a consequence, what we saw during the 80s and 90s was a massive contraction in the economies across the Global South that were subjected to structural adjustment. And that caused poverty rates to go up really dramatically. I mean, it was a devastating time where we see poverty and hunger rising during the structural adjustment period. And this again is something that Americans have really unfortunately forgotten about, the role that their government played through the World Bank and the IMF, along with other rich nations, in reversing the progress that Global South countries have made in the previous decades.
And again, it is very much like the housing crisis. You lead these countries into a situation where they become overextended, and the bailout could have happened directly to them, but instead it happens to the banks under the requirements that they sell off all their assets, do a short sale on their homes, I guess, would be the analogy on some level. And in some instances also are forced to sort of basically build these big infrastructure boondoggles that promise to use American financed companies, right? Like these banks turn around, they're like, we're going to make another loan for you to build this dam that we're going to pay off of.
That's right.
You're going to get paid for monies that we're giving to these countries in response for them cutting services, essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, no, I think the subprime analogy here is really apt, actually. And it's important to realize that the U.S. and Western Europe took this opportunity to impose Washington consensus neoliberal policy across the Global South, right, which they were unable to do before because democracies would always reject it. And so this is how globalization came about. It was forcibly imposed on the world through structural adjustments. Okay, so there are some parts of the world that were not structurally adjusted, like East Asia and China. Were allowed to retain their earlier policies of basically state-led developments with remarkable success, right? So the countries that have actually succeeded in dramatically reducing poverty, like Taiwan, like China, like South Korea, have followed a completely different path, a path that was actively denied to the rest of the Global South. And I think that's really important to understand.
All right, and one of the things that you tackle is the idea that, in fact, we have lowered that we have lowered global poverty, and you basically argue that this is we've lowered the number, but not the actuality of poverty. Explain that.
Yeah, so it's actually a bit different than that. So, but let me start with the dominant narrative that's out there that we hear from people like Bill Gates and Steve Pinker, who are all over the place saying that basically poverty is being eradicated, being reduced really quickly, and it's all thanks to neoliberal globalization. Like, yes, maybe it's causing a bit more inequality, but at least we know that it's working against poverty, and so therefore it justifies the global economy as it is, and we should carry on with the status quo. Now, the only way that narrative works is by relying on an extremely low poverty line of $1.90 per day. Okay. It's so low that it's actually impossible to have any kind of meaningful existence on that amount of money at all. I mean, imagine, yourself trying to live on $1.90 a day. I mean, that's literally what it is. It's what $1.90 a day buys in the U.S. So what we know from piles of research is that people need, at minimum about $7.40 a day to sort of achieve basic nutrition, normal human life expectancy, a decent shot of surviving their 5th birthday, et cetera. And now, if we measure poverty at that level around the world, then what we see is that the story changes completely. In fact, the number of people in poverty below that line has increased dramatically since the 1980s and now stands at 4.2 billion people, or about 60% of the human population, which is 6 times higher than what people like Gates and Pinker would have us believe. And with figures like this on the table, it becomes abundantly clear that the global economy is, in fact, not working for the majority of humanity. And is deeply unfair and needs to be changed. But that's a narrative that people like Pinker and Gates cannot abide.
Sorry, so how is that the case? I mean, how is it that we don't hear more of this? I mean, how is it that what constitutes poverty is really is just simply an absurd figure to assess.
Yeah, it's completely absurd. In fact, even the World Bank that produces the $1.90 a day line itself warns over and over that it is not adequate to inform policy, right? That we shouldn't really take it seriously for most countries in the world, maybe only for the very poorest. And yet we do, because it's powerful, and journalists keep repeating it because it tells such a powerful, happy story, a rosy narrative about what's happening to the economy. When in fact the reality is much darker. It's true that people's incomes have been increasing, but only by pennies, and not nearly enough to actually lift them out of poverty according to any meaningful definition. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that during the same period, the income captured by the global 1% has absolutely skyrocketed to the point where the 1% now controls in the region of 18 or 19 trillion US dollars themselves. Now, even just 1/3 of that would be enough to end global poverty at a high poverty line forever, right? 1/3. And it would still leave the global 1% with nearly $200,000 on average in income per year, right? So effectively, all of the new income generated by global growth over the past few decades has been captured by the richest of the world. And the poorest have received literally, pennies on the dollar in terms of trickle down. It truly is an injustice, especially when you consider the fact that it's the global south from which the world gets most of its resources and most of its labor. The people that are contributing to the global economy most are the ones who are being paid by far the least and living in poverty.
So basically, the story is that we have been sold, if we have global growth, that the pie is going to expand. It's true that an uneven amount will be distributed to those at the top, but those at the bottom will get stuff. And what they basically did was lowered the threshold enough so that every small penny that came in looked that much of a larger of a percentage of increase as to the bottom line. I mean, it's as if basically saying we want to raise the age of everybody in the country. And so what we're going to do is, we're going to let time go, and we're just going to measure kids' years in months. And so look at they're getting so much older, and we're going to keep
basically right.
We're going to measure adults years and years, and they're getting so much older, these kids, and they're really picking up the speed. And then we define being a teenager as being 36 months, and we have all these teenagers now because they enter teenage in year 3 or 4. I mean, that's just the way that's just an analogy for people to sort of just see the way that this income or wealth is distributed here. So, okay. So with this, what would be, and you have a significant portion of the book dedicated towards fixing this, but it seems to me that one of the first things you would need to do is actually present the real numbers for people. I mean, to widely disseminate that. Yeah. But after that, what's next?
Yeah, good question. So in the book, I go through a number of different policy proposals that are completely feasible and easy to implement if we just had the political will, which is basically the real problem. But one of the main things I point out here is the fact that right now the institutions that control the rules of the global economy, like the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, are deeply anti-democratic institutions where the U.S. holds veto power over all major decisions. And the global south, which has 85% of the world's population, has less than 50% of the vote. And this is kind of a global apartheid at the very center of macroeconomic institutions, which we would never accept if it was in any normal country. Okay, so the first step is to democratize the institutions that control the global economy to make sure that poor countries have a fair voice in them. On top of that, I think we need to start talking about what a global minimum wage would look like, right? I mean, if capitalism is globalized, then it stands to reason that we need to globalize the rules that protect people from it. And so I propose what a global minimum wage might look like. That would be pegged at 50% of each country's minimum income, median income. So it would fluctuate depending on each country's level of development. and therefore not cause too much disruption. And this would massively increase the share of the global economy that poor people in poor countries are able to capture for the work they put into it. Okay. Other ideas include we need to clamp down on tax evasion and illicit financial flows, which by which multinational companies, most of them headquartered in the West, extract in the region of $1 trillion plus US dollars per year from the global South, a massive outflow of wealth from South to North that vastly outstrips any meager amount of aid that trickles the other direction. So, and then also, crucially, I guess the last thing I would say is the importance of canceling, some of these old unpayable debts, these old odious debts, and thereby releasing poor countries from policy control by rich creditors and allowing them to use their own budgets, for healthcare and education, improving the quality of life of the population. So these solutions are fundamentally different from what we normally think about. Normally we think, they just, poor countries need a bit more aid here and there, a few technological fixes maybe. What I argue instead is that what they need is not charity, but rather justice. We have to fundamentally change the rules of the global economy to make it fair for the world's majority.
So lastly, let me ask you this. If it is simply ultimately a question of political will, and presumably the countries like the United States have more than their share of the political will that is distributed, right? Because they want to maintain it. It's like, what is the pitch? What do we tell the American public in terms of why, to the extent that, and presumably the American public has a disproportionate share of the responsibility for that political will, right? On how that political will gets manifested. What do we tell the American public? Is it simply a case of this is justice, or is there a material argument to be made as well?
I think that people on some level are very deeply uncomfortable with the fact that we all know that the goods that we consume have a devastating impact on people's lives, in the sense of our clothes are made by people in sweatshops, our smartphones, include minerals produced by effectively slaves in the Congo, et cetera. I mean, this makes us feel horrible about ourselves. On some deep level, I think it depresses us, it dehumanizes us. I think that we have a lot to gain, I guess spiritually, if you will, from living in an economy, a global economy that is fundamentally fair. I think that we would be happier and have a better sense of we're in solidarity with our fellow humans. I think there's a lot to gain from that in the terms of recovering our humanity after 500 years of plunder. So, and I think it's crucial that we pay close attention to the foreign policy platforms of the presidents and other representatives that we elect, right? I mean, we can elect people that will change these rules. We can elect people that will bring about not just a fair economy in the U.S., but also in the world system itself. The U.S. has an incredible amount of bargaining power, on the stage of the world system, and can change things. And if we manage to elect people that have the will to do that, then that would be very powerful. And I think people like Bernie Sanders and AOC are people who are in that camp.
Jason Hickel, the book is The Divide, A Brief Guide to Global Inequality and Its Solutions. Thanks so much for your time today. We'll put a link to The Divide at majorityradio.com. Thanks again for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Bye-bye. There you have it, folks.
Take that, Steven Pinker.
Right. And it really is stunning, the amount of what we perceive as foreign policy problems in this country that we discuss on a near daily basis that are a function of our foreign policy. As if these things just sort of, popped up out of nowhere. It is, and the analogy between our relationship with the global South and, frankly, and it may not even be an analogy as much as it's an extension, or it's in a different, it's a different facet of our relationship with the global South relative to our relationship in this country between people of color and the white power structure and the notion of white supremacy. I mean, these things probably are not as much analogous as they are of the same species, and just simply a different sort of part of the problem.
Yeah, and if you go back even further to the kind of primitive accumulation that he was talking about, you see very explicitly how these things are connected to early capitalist development.
Indeed. All right. Well, let's take a quick break and head into the fun half. Before we do, as you remember, I mentioned earlier, the Majority Report is this episode is supported by Pitchfork Economics with Nick Hanauer, weekly podcast that explores why rising income inequality will lead to pitchforks and what we can do about it. Every week, Hanauer is joined by some of the world's most original economic thinkers in a convention-busting exploration of who gets what and why in the American economy. If you want to learn how to make the economy work for all Americans, subscribe to Pitchfork Economics at pitchforkeconomics.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And speaking of podcasts, you can become a member of this podcast, and you can support this show by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Every day, we try and bring you either a in-depth interview that will have you have a greater understanding of a narrow part of our political landscape. And so at the end of a year or month or years, you'll have a far greater understanding of how these things connect. I sort of feel like, I mean, having spoken to, we have a pre-recorded interview that we did for we're going to run, I think, in April on the Dust Bowl and sort of the capitalist practices that bring about sort of the economic devastation in a place like the Dust Bowl, and how we see that same dynamic play out in as Jason Hickel was explaining in India, and see this all throughout the world. I almost feel like we need like one day a year we do 24-hour podcast where we just sort of like show the connections between these shows, rather than having to sort of like, who's got the time to put it all together? Do you know what I'm saying?
I trust the audience to do that.
Well, you got to take. I guess that's what the weekends are for,
right?
So people should be
get
sitting
you a
down.
Blackboard. That's what Brendan said. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's a big blackboard.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big blackboard. Get a huge. There's also you could probably do something with like a TV where you could have like a rolling blackboard. So as you pretend like you're stepping to the right, the TV is actually the thing that's moving. Yes.
Don't tell Glenn Beck about this.
Right. Anyways, folks, that was a little bit of a detour in my saying that you can support this program, which attempts to provide that rolling blackboard every day by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, don't forget to support justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Coupon code majority, get 10% off. I want to thank those guys for sending me a poster of our Majority Report blend coffee. We're going to frame that bad boy and hang it in the office proudly. But you go over there, you can get the Majority Report blend, you get any other type of coffee, and it's all fair trade. It's a great company, co-op owned. And today is Monday. Michael's here. That's weird. And tomorrow is Tuesday.
What I'm doing here.
It's 2 in a row.
It's two in a row. It is 2 in a row.
Excuse me, guys.
Full on streak.
Yeah. I don't really feel so great, though. So
no, I am exhausted.
Have a good fun.
I'm exhausted. I had a horrible bout of heartburn last night. It kept me up for like 3 or 4 hours.
That is a very Semitic trait that Sam has.
I wasn't at the. I wasn't with
you
the
walk
kids
in and
last
Sam
night,
goes,
so no
"How
pipes.
you doing, man? How you doing? Good morning." You go, "It was a good." I'll tell you how my weekend was. I had heartburn and I couldn't sleep, and my kids, and you're just like, oh my God, Jesus Christ!
I didn't complain about my kids. I was not with the kids.
And then I wasn't with the kids because that's the heartburn week, and then next week will be a kid and pipe week, and then it's no sleep either way.
Right?
Did you see this? That's what he starts showing you. Sound he's excited about.
That's the behind the scenes, folks.
Did you see what Howard Schultz said?
We should
Play it again.
We should really
Play it again.
We should really be saving that for the fun half. That great behind the scenes stuff for the fun half.
Play it again.
Giving
Tomorrow
it away for free.
on the Michael Brooks Show, Harvey J.K. and Daniel Bessner are joining us both in studio. There's going to be a internal left debate on American exceptionalism and a discussion of how the right wing suppresses American progressive history as well as democracy and foreign policy. And, of course, a whole bunch of other stuff. You can stream it live on our YouTube channel, Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Thanks to our first 34,000 subscribers there, and get the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS. See you tomorrow around 7-ish.
We should get Harvey K into Majority Report one of these days, too.
Definitely.
Jamie, the Intifada.
So we actually released this on Friday. It was going to be a bonus for patrons, but...
Good episode.
Thank you. In light of recent events, we decided to release it without the paywall. In this edition of History is a Weapon, Sean and Matt Christman from Chapo Trap House go deep into French history to explain where nationalism and right-wing populism and white nationalism all come from. France was first in a lot of things, and they were first in that, unfortunately. And they do this through the lens of a book called The Camp of the Saints, which was written in the 1970s as sort of an immigrant panic. And it's still very relevant because it provides a lot of the ideological framework for people like Marine Le Pen and Steve Bannon. So they kind of connect the dots. If anyone wants to know more about how bourgeois society crumbles into fascism, please listen to this episode.
Matt.
King Philip's War, or Metacomet's Rebellion, as we call it, and the captivity narrative of Mary Rowlandson released this weekend. I'll sell you on it, Sam. The King Philip's War has two elements you're interested in. Generational conflict, because Metacomet realized that, and some zero-sumness. So Metacomet
here we go.
realizes that the older sachems were basically not fighting, like they're settling all the land that the younger generation wanted to like have sort of control over, and they're like, well, the younger sachems are like, no, we're gonna fight these guys now. So
actual generational war.
Well, they didn't fight the older generation. They just decided to fight the colonists.
That's exactly how the staff jobs at NBC were. All this.
Wait, what was the zero-sum part?
The land.
All right,
yeah.
There you go. All right, folks, quick break. Headed
Good
to the fun half. See you there. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238-56-27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You. Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
All right, folks. Fun half. Little tense around here. This is the day that Mila finds out what high school she's going to. Don't know yet. What? You don't? Are you guessing? She auditioned for LaGuardia, but who knows? There's a bunch of schools that she would be happy to go to. They're completely disparate. They're all over the place. Ugh, I don't know if I can deal with this guy first. In all honesty, like the idea of like watching Rahm Emanuel is.
We could just get right to the main event, which is Egg Boy.
Yeah, let's start with Mick Mulvaney, shall we? And then we'll go to Egg Boy.
He's never been a main event of anything.
Well, Mick Mulvaney, I love the idea that they brought him on St. Patrick's Day. I think that's pretty good. But I also...
Insult to the Irish people.
Mick Mulvaney did not bring his... Well, he may have brought his A game, but he did not bring a game to face the nation. This is pretty stunning how how he is defending the President of the United States from being an influence on white nationalism across the globe. When the killer in New Zealand specifically cited, I am sane enough to realize that Trump is a buffoon, but I also appreciate the work he's doing for white nationalism. That's essentially what he said. And here's Mick Mulvaney trying to make the argument that it's so unfair. Like even the numbers, even this keeping tallies of things is a problem.
Referring to what happened here. Broadly speaking, a number of attacks and support for white supremacy is up, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And even a Trump-appointed attorney in the state of Virginia, Thomas Cullen, was recently quoted as saying, white supremacy and far-right extremism are among the greatest domestic security threats facing the United States. Has the president been briefed on this?
I don't know who that gentleman is. Certainly the president's briefed on all of...
You know who the Southern Poverty Law Center is?
I do. The president's absolutely briefed on all of the threats, both domestic and international. But I want to push back against this idea that every time something bad happens everywhere around the world, folks who don't like Donald Trump seem to blame it on Donald Trump. I'm hoping we can get...
I'm not blaming it on the president. I was asking about his characterization.
I didn't say you. I'm saying that that's clearly what some folks want to do. I've heard other members of the Democrat Party trying to do it, folks at the Southern Poverty Law Center here trying to do it. This is a tragic thing that happened in New Zealand.
They're just saying the number of white nationalist groups has surged by 50%.
Since Trump has become office, right?
Well, in the past year.
There you go. Here's the point.
Excuse me. Well, there you go. You're just deciding normal time frames, like the past year.
Statistic
or
that
the
happens.
Past 2 years.
Oh, well, there you go. It happened at the same time.
But, I mean, what if you were to look at, for instance, has the number of white nationalist groups gone up over the course of like 200 years? How could you possibly blame that on Trump? You couldn't, right? So let's look at that. That's basically his argument here.
Let's be a little fair here.
That's his argument basically is at this point, like, it is unfair to use the period of time that Donald Trump has been in office or any part of that time he's in office to make that measurement, is what his argument is. Go back. It's sort of astonishing. Like, oh, there you go. 1 year, of course. Going back a year. Well, have you gone back?
You're blaming me for a deficit number. How about you start before I became president? Come on. What about be a little fair, Mick?
But the increase in the deficit is what would be the analogy. Like,
well, that's what I'm
there
saying.
is nothing.
That's what I'm saying.
There is no. This is just bizarre.
That's clearly what some folks want to do. I've heard other members of the Democrat Party trying to do it, folks at the Southern Poverty Law Center here trying to do it. This is a tragic thing that happened in New Zealand.
They're just saying the number of white nationalist groups has surged by 50%.
Since Trump has become office, right?
Well, in the past year.
There you go. So here's the point. Why
do
can't
you
we
disagree that it's a rising threat?
I disagree that there's a causal link between Donald Trump being president and something like this happening in New Zealand.
But that's not the argument or the suggestion there, by the judge or by that statistic. Is the president aware that this is a rising threat?
Again, a rising threat. I think the president, you saw him asked the other day, does he think it's a rising threat? And he says, no, I think there's information that would back that up. The issue is, how do you stop these crazy people, whether or not there's one of them or
So pause it.
four
So
of
let me
them.
be clear. First, he says it's unfair to blame this rising threat on Donald Trump. And then he says, and of course, there is no rising threat. As the president has said, there's no rising threat. So it's not just that it's unfair to blame the president on this rising threat. It's that there is no rising threat. And on top of that, it's just not. You're saying there's a causal connection between the rising threat and the presidency, and I'm saying that's not a causal connection. And as for the next question, I'm going to say it doesn't exist anyways.
The issue is, how do you stop these crazy people? Whether or not there's one of them or four of them doesn't make a difference if they're willing to go on live TV and stream the murder of people. So I think that's where the time is better spent. Instead of worrying about, well, who's to blame? How do we stop from doing this? Donald Trump is no more to blame for what happened in New Zealand than Mark Zuckerberg is, because he invented Facebook. There are some terrible people in the world. We need to work with our partners, of which New Zealand is one of them, to try and figure a way to find them, expose them, and bring them to justice.
Well, President Trump.
I'll also say that there is a decent argument out there that Facebook is adding to, and these type of social media platforms is adding to the virulence and the spread of this ideology, and that they have some type of responsibility to sit on it. In fact, I mean, there's a reason why Gab, is that what it is, exists, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of these white nationalists have been kicked off of Twitter. So that didn't work out so well for Mick Mulvaney.
Yeah, we're fine with blaming Facebook.
Work with our partners, of which New Zealand is one of them, to try and figure a way to find them, expose them, and bring them to justice.
Well, President Trump, and certainly during the campaign, talked quite a lot about the need to be specific, to name a threat in order to counter it. So why minimize it? Why not directly address white supremacy and specifically Islamophobia?
Yeah, I get a lot of
because
questions
a number
about.
of world leaders did, and the president didn't.
I get a lot of questions from people saying, well, you need to tell the president to do X. You need to tell the president to go and give an Oval Office address on this or on that. That's not how the system works. The president communicates in his way. Different presidents
I believe that.
communicated in their way. I don't think anybody can claim that Donald Trump hasn't done exactly what we would want him to do in this circumstance. We've immediately reached out to our allies. We've expressed the absolute disgust at the tragic events. We're doing what presidents are supposed to do. That doesn't mean that it's going to make everybody happy because of the hyper-partisan times we live in. But again, I really, it frustrates me just as a citizen.
Oh, I don't even want to hear this anymore. Honestly, he moved, and you know, I don't. Maybe what Margaret Brennan is hearing is different from what I'm hearing. But he just said, "Oh, I'm not responsible. I've been here as a spokesperson for the president until this moment, where you ask me why he's the only one who's not talking about white nationalism. That's not the process of what the presidency is.
If we have
I'm not the president. I'm just the acting second acting chief of staff, or whatever it is. My title this week. I'm just the guy who's in the office who's not his son-in-law. So I'm not going to take any responsibility for that, but I can tell you these suggestions of causal connections and the idea that there's anything to be causal connected by is also ridiculous. I mean, this is like a parody. I don't know why they bring that guy back on.
No, he's running out the clock in a calm tone, saying basically nothing. That's his job. And they don't even have to make all of their excuses make sense put together because they have the power.
Yeah, I like the tone bluffing, which is like, I'm going to ask for a clarification on that number you gave, and then act like it absolves Trump of everything, even though it's just like, oh, what time frame do you got there? That's right. That's expert level, I think.
Yeah, no, you're both right here. And really, on some level, it's like they got to pick up the game a little bit on Face the Nation or wherever it is. You got to just you almost get meta as to what is going on. Like, wait a second. First, you argue there's no causal connection. Then you argue that there is no rising threat. Which is it? Is there no rising threat, or is there no causal connection? Because you can't make the case there's no causal connection to something that doesn't exist. You wouldn't have to make that argument because it doesn't exist.
I also don't particularly care for the I get what she's doing with the president said you need to be really specific about Muslim terrorism, but I
totally meant that.
Yeah, specific. I
mean,
that's
not
actually
just to attack
really
Obama.
Right, and that's actually kind of the point, right? Neither of those things are specific. With Muslims, they universalize an entire group of people in an act of bigotry, discrimination, and bans, and then when it's white nationalist terrorism, it's non-specific to the point of totally opaque.
Doesn't matter. If
Whereas
it's
there's
1,
actually,
4,
there's a happy middle here where we could say, Al-Qaeda did that. A white nationalist terrorist did that. It's really actually not that hard. And in neither case are you being specific. It's just one, you're obscuring and distracting, and the other, you're doing bigotry.
Just a reminder, here is Donald Trump back in 2016. At a New Hampshire rally, and somebody yells out to him, or I guess asks him a question about the problem we have in this country. It's called Muslims.
Okay, we problem in this country. It's called Muslims. We know our current president is one. Right. You know he's not even an American.
We need this
birth
question.
certificate, man. But anyway, we have training camps growing where they want to kill us. Mm-hmm. That's my question. When can we get rid of them?
We're going to be looking at a lot of different things. And, a lot of people are saying that, and a lot of people are saying that bad things are happening out there. We're going to be looking at that and plenty of other things.
And so you can see it's sort of the evolution of, in his mind, he's going hey, wait a second. Can I get away with this? Is this going to fly? I guess it will. I guess I can go a little further. And there we have it. I mean, we all look at this guy like lunatic, but he does have over 50% support in multiple states across the country. He does have 45% approval rating. His approval rating in the Republican Party is over 90%. So when someone you approve of, someone who has the authority of the president of the United States, which, look, we don't have a monarchy in this country, but to the extent that we have anything that comes close, it would be the presidency, wouldn't it? And, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but the way that kings became kings was because God placed them there. So even if we have a sort of a monarchy substitute, which just captures the imagination of let's say, close to half of the population. Let's say it's only a third of the population, right? Just a third of the 300 million people in this country, more or less. When they hear him validate what a lunatic like that says, president's Muslim. We got a problem. We have a problem in this country. It's called Muslims.
When can we get rid of them?
When can we get rid of them?
When can we get rid of them?
And then you combine that. So you've got this sort of I don't know what percentage of the American population or the white population around the world perceives Donald Trump as sort of somewhat godlike because he's the president of the United States. But it's not an absurd assertion that there are millions of those people.
There's some people who think he's in shape.
And And to basically say, like, we've got one problem. I mean, yeah, the people who commit these type of crimes are mentally unbalanced. But that's also on a sliding scale. And you're giving more oxygen to these sort of embers that are out there. And this is what you get. This is why there is a rise. Maybe it's just a total coincidence that there's been a rise of hate attacks and hate groups and violence in this way. But maybe it's not.
What Ann Coulter doesn't understand is that there's a cultural permission. It's not just the policy.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of neo-Nazis appreciate me being here.
Well, the shooter said in the manifesto, right? Trump's not going to give us everything we want. I don't like him as a policymaker. He's getting the message out there of white nationalism.
Exactly.
So we're in a war with these people, and we need to get our message out there of anti-racism, anti-hierarchy in general.
And speaking of getting the message out there, I think like the importance of acts like this cannot be overstated. To show that these fascists and fascistic bullies, regardless of where they are, that they are touchable, that they are not omnipotent, that their scare tactics are not scaring everybody, that people can stand up to them, I think is hugely important. Hugely important. I think far more important than we can sort of like even rationally assess. Because so much of the horrors that have happened in the world have happened because people were just a little bit embarrassed or cowed or didn't know if they should speak up, or, there's sort of like a dynamic, like, they say like most people die when they drown of it's embarrassment, that they're embarrassed to yell for help. And before they and then it's too late. And I think if you read back in times of genocide and whatnot, particularly in the context of the Holocaust, or at least I've done most of the reading that I've done on this topic has been in that context. It's just a lot of people just like looking around, looking for social cues and saying like, I guess it's not that bad. I mean, nobody else seems to be doing anything about it. And maybe they were afraid to do about it, but they're also looking around. No one's taking that first step. So little acts of disobedience, little acts of basically saying, we're just not going to be silent. Like, you're not going to get away with this, and we know you're doing it, is hugely important. And so when this kid, and I don't know how old Egg Boy is, but in Australia, is at a press conference with a senator, an Australian senator. And I don't know if he was Fraser Anning and this Egg Boy, William Connolly, where they were. I think they must have been they were in Melbourne. And this is a day after Fraser Anning issued a statement suggesting that New Zealand's decision to admit Muslim immigrants was to blame for the devastating attack on the two mosques that left 50 dead. I guess Connolly's 17 years old, now known as Egg Boy, stands there with his cell phone. And I'll tell you the amazing thing that I thought was really sort of like just showed a tremendous amount of coverage. Not only did he stand there with his cell phone when he goes and eggs this guy, but the guy punches him in the face. And the kid continues to hold up the cell phone, like knowing, like, this is important. And so here's Fraser Anning giving his news conference, and right behind him is Connolly, and then this ensues.
A lot of things happen when people are getting attacked in their own.
No, I think it's like sort of a fascistic little crew of guys around him.
The Goon Squad.
Goon Squad gets the get the.
Look at those bogans.
Trying to rip his head off.
Yep. And so they grab this guy, and they're trying to cause him a considerable amount of pain here. And then this jumps to another angle here.
That a weak human fucking being, you prick.
No, I ain't letting the cops. Get the cops. Don't what you told him, mate. Get the cops.
Trying to break his neck.
You are nothing but a weak human fucking being, you prick.
Yep. Good for that guy. Absolute hero. Really important to show
Hero.
that. And then
Seriously.
Incredible courage.
Anning is like the Steve King of Australia, only he's worse than that. Like, he used taxpayer money to go hang out with Nazis and crazy things like that.
And then we have another clip. Do we have this other clip of somebody else at an airport?
This is great because they don't do anything like throw an egg at him, but they're clearly, fully grown, and he doesn't have any detail with him, and he gets, coward.
Yes, and look, these guys do this because of Egg Boy. I'm convinced, right? It works both ways. You can empower people in both ways, and so here's some guys who apparently catch up with with this guy in the. I think this must be the Melbourne airport, but they catch up with Fraser Anning. And don't know who the guys are, and this is in the Melbourne, Australia airport, and it's a guy named Ali Badiri who approaches Anning and gives him a piece of his mind.
They have any fucking remorse, huh? They have any remorse. No, don't touch me. Don't touch me. Yeah, don't touch me. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. They have any remorse to the families, huh? They have any fucking remorse? Huh? Straight up. Yeah, I'm not touching you. I'm leaving you alone. They have any remorse? All the people that died and everything, and then you're telling me, hey, fucking, huh? You know how to swear, don't you? You're a senator. You're a senator of Australia. Look how you act. You're a senator.
Any remorse for anything?
You have no fucking remorse. Yeah, go do something. Go do something. You're representing Australia, aren't you? Go do something. Do something, don't you? Go. Go, you sick cunt. Go. Go. Yeah, Senator of Australia. You're a shit cunt. You're a fucking shit cunt. That's what you are. Go fuck yourself, you fucking little shit.
They have a slightly different. They have a slightly different set of swears than we do, or at least they juxtapose them in a different fashion. And here is a remix of Egg Boy just to follow out. But kudos to all those Australians who are making this guy's life miserable. And understand that in Australia, there's a very different dynamic than in at least the States when it comes to celebrities and politicians. There's not huge entourages. People aren't terribly impressed in the way that they are in this country and stop and like, oh, there it is. And so this guy is going to feel pretty exposed, I think, and good. He should. But let's see what this is. Oh, there you go. We don't want to play too much and get dinged, but... Oh,
man. I'm also a fan of the Death Grips remix that somebody made. They have a lot of smashy sounds in their music, so you could do it with any Death Grip song.
Feels like the Richard Spencer day.
Yeah, it really does.
It was.
And the nice thing about the egg smush, in my mind, is that you don't have people saying like, you shouldn't, resort to violence. Like, it's just an egg. Like, people did this in at Halloween. No one's going to get hurt. But it is basically a way of saying, we don't have respect for you. You are touchable. You are not going to intimidate us. And so I am very much of the pro-egging. I think that's huge. This is also similar to the pieing that we used to see, except for eggs are more easily concealed and carried in many respects. I think egg is a super effective thing. Plus, an egg will smell after time. And
I feel like the pie makes people too sympathetic too, like because they got all the pie on their face.
yes, egg is a little bit smaller, and the thing
Not
is
as
that
visual.
egg it'll get in your fingernails and it'll smell later. Egg is, I think, super effective, and so hopefully this is becoming a thing where fascists all around the world will have to wear anti-egg clothing, because here is Bolsonaro. Is this in Brazil or is this in?
I think he's already in
the States. No.
No. I think this is in Brazil, though. I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
He's coming though, so
He's
get
here
your eggs
now.
ready.
He's here now.
He's coming to New York.
Oh, he's coming to New York, and he has a meeting at the White House, and all Brazilian, friends have requested, please show up there with Lula Libre signs and your middle finger and everything else.
Eggs on cars. That's the other nice thing about eggs.
Eggs
It's a
are
nice
very
trajectory.
mobile. That's
And
right.
I don't know, can you be arrested for throwing an egg? It's more like you dropped an egg, right? Like I was coming from the market with my eggs and I dropped the eggs.
Not on
Someone
purpose.
knocked my hand and the egg went. So, but here is an anonymous woman.
He's also going directly to visit the CIA. That's slightly unusual for a foreign head of state.
Yes. Here is a woman who introduces her egg to Bolsonaro. Yep, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, that's
heroes. We've got egg
heroes.
boy.
I hope
egg
she's
girl.
okay.
I've been looking. I'm worried about that. Yes, incredible courage.
Well, it happened
because
a few
these people
years
are
ago.
literal gangsters. I mean,
they've already killed.
Yeah, they've
Before
killed.
he had-
They're cartelled up.
I mean, hopefully it was before he had all his brown shirts or whatever, so she was okay.
Oh, was this now? This was this was not recent.
No, it was a few years ago.
That egging was. a few
But it
years
just
ago?
started going around again.
Oh Jesus!
did
I
not
thought
know
it was
that.
recent. My mistake.
All right. Well, let's
But
go.
Point still stands.
Oh, somehow my phone hung up on me. All right, give me a second. We'll go to the phones, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your patience.
The majority report.
All of you folks who
Sam will be with you shortly.
holding on the phones very
Sam,
patiently.
I'll be with you shortly. It should be customized.
Yeah, I
I'll
agree.
be on the phone soon.
I read that when the cops were
stop
coming,
bothering me.
Egg Boy said, "Here comes the bacon for the egg," and the cops thought it was funny, and the brown shirts did not.
Australia has a different folks there have a much more sophisticated sense of humor. Frankly, I'm not being facetious about that. You're calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? You are the first caller on today's edition of the Majority Report.
Hello?
Hello.
Is this me?
It is you.
Hey, this is Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. How are you, sir? I hope you're getting sleep.
More than my wife. My wife.
Great.
Hey, Sam.
Yes.
Today,
Ronald Reagan.
I turned on, so I saw a link to the Pac-Man show, which I make fun of, but I've never actually really watched it.
Okay.
He just seems like a kind of a dorky guy, right?
Well, I mean,
and
he likes to wear a sport jacket.
So I turn it on, and he's reading comments and questions, but they're these YouTube super chats that you have to pay for.
Right.
And these questions are just pouring in, like $10 a pop. People are asking him, like, what do you think about Cory Booker? And somebody paid like $10 to get him to answer that.
Right. Okay.
It's
well, we have a
Yes.
super chat too, and people do that. I mean, we have the option of saying that if you pay, we will answer your question, but we prefer a lottery-based system that involves the phones, where I mean, if people want to tip us on Super Chat, more than appreciated, believe me. And, we see those figures every week, and some people really come in and they dump a big chunk of change for, once a month and, whatnot. But
But
Ronald
then
Reagan, how much
the
would
best
you
part-
like
the
to pay
best-
me to respond to what you're saying?
Well, hold on. I'm getting to the good part.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So he says that he has a phone number, that he's going to take calls, but that he won't do it until he gets 10 new subscribers, 10 new patrons or whatever.
I like
members.
this. This is interesting.
And so he's got a gun to the phones.
Well,
and he's holding them hostage.
Right.
Saying, and guess what? He got there very quickly. And it just seems like you're leaving a lot of money on the table, my guy. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, I mean, so what should I do? Like, it's say, like, we're going to have, if we get 10 members, I'm going to start answering the phones today. We should do that every day. Like, we haven't got 10 new members. So,
Kelly Carey agrees with you, Reagan. She's trying to push this.
So, was she?
Yeah, back in the day.
What that
we do super chats.
They do super chats. Yeah, that we do super chats. Yeah.
No.
But no, I mean, it's not. I'm not against it. I just am not for it.
It just seems like you are a boss and a capitalist wage cock. You should be all about just putting all the money, getting all the money.
Well, I mean,
I'm saying.
You can be a boss and a capitalist wage cuck with not necessarily being good at it. I mean, that's sort of like where I position myself. I'm just like, some of the things.
I feel you there.
Plus, my feeling is like, yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I submitted a super chat because I wanted to ask him about how he copied your set.
Oh, right.
And so, yeah. So I said, is it true that you literally asked Sam Seder how to build his set and then copied it exactly? And he said, yes, that's a true story. And then he got a little self-conscious about it. He said, wait, is Sam like saying something about it? Which you're not, but you should be.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I tell you what I do. I will answer the question that David has if I am saying anything about it. If he pays me, if he has the highest super chat, if he doubles his super chat revenue of any given week, and then puts it into my super chat to ask me, and then I will take I will answer that question.
So it sounds like we're gonna have super chat, but only for David Pakman.
Super chat. Well, no, everybody can super chat, but I guess only for David Pakman. Yeah. So.
Super Pakman.
Yeah, I don't know really what just happened right there. I'm not sure what you just said, but it doesn't seem like a good solution. But I do think
what do you think
that
the solution
you need to
should
call
be?
him out a little bit more.
Why? I mean, he asked me, and I told him. I could have said, "I'm not telling you."
Well,
I didn't realize he would go.
Did you anticipate when you answered the question? You thought he was asking you like handyman questions, and so you're like,
Right.
"Let me tell you about my table saw."
Right.
I can totally see this.
Yes.
This happening.
Yep.
So I ripped the 2x4s and whatever. So
you don't rip a 2x4.
But you weren't thinking
you do that with that with plywood. You wouldn't do that with a 2x4. But go ahead.
You weren't thinking he was going to literally copy your set, right?
I thought he was.
He wasn't like, hey,
I thought he was looking
I
for
want to
tips.
copy your set exactly. Tell me how to do it.
You thought it was like another startup, and you were like, "Oh, let's exchange ideas." You didn't realize that it was like the sometimes in business espionage when you go in and you go, "Hey, what is your plan here?" And then before you know it, you're actually giving them the whole algorithm on a whiteboard.
Yeah,
that's what you did. In a way, Sam deserves it, wouldn't you say, Reagan, for being so naive?
Very naive, actually. Yeah.
I just thought.
Yeah,
I thought.
totally.
I did. It did not occur to me that he was going to build the exact same thing. I thought he would like take inspiration from what I did.
Look,
and maybe
Pakman's a mercenary. Pakman is literally not telling people what he thinks of Cory Booker without money.
Even if it was,
I would feel bad doing that.
A different paneling. Yeah, it's the exact same panels. Now, I mean, they're. But you know what?
He said, well, mine's different because I've got the TV over here.
Well,
that's what he said when he answered the question. But I mean, give me a break.
Can you go to the wide
right?
shot, please?
Come on, Pakman.
Can you go to the wide shot? No, the wide shot here.
The wide shot is not zoomed out.
Oh.
Sorry about that.
So one other thing that where
putting the
Pakman
TV
had
in
you
there
kind of
from now
owned,
on.
and
Yeah.
then I got to jump.
Yeah. You gotta
when you call Pacman, he does the robot voice, like, thank you for calling the David Pacman. But it's the exact same. He's using the same service as you.
Yeah.
But his robot voice says, please do not use speakerphone and respond when he reads your area. Like, there's some instructions.
Oh, hell yeah.
And I feel like your robot voice could be a little bit more explicit about what's expected from the callers.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that.
Like,
That will be noted.
I strongly
Thank you
support
for calling the Majority Report. Please get to the point and don't mention modern monetary theory.
Right.
Or whatever.
Ronald Reagan, all of your
Just as an example.
all of your suggestions will be taken under consideration, and I appreciate the phone call. Oh, boy, everybody's dropping the ball here. And we got you. We got your question. Is it true that you literally asked Sam Seder how to build a set before you copied it?
Never said that. Stephen Robbins says, is it true that you literally asked Sam Seder how to build his set before you copied it? Yes, I did. I mean, the difference is I've set it up. I've combined our old set, which has this screen behind me, with similar paneling. I mean, basically what I copied was I asked him, how did he build the panels? And he told me. And I'm curious, I've said that Sam helped me with what I needed to buy, but did he, like, if someone called him and asked him about that, I would be interested in seeing that. That sounds pretty fun. Let me know if that's the case.
So Pacman's going to cut this segment and comment on this segment. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut the segment that he comments on this segment. And that's basically going to be our business
Ouroboros.
The plans
Yeah.
for, yeah.
I was going to say
that's
this is grist for the Progressive Voices mill.
Oh, yeah.
So, welcome back to Progressive Voices. So, David Pacman was building a set, and did he steal the intellectual property of Sam Seder? Because what Sam Seder seemed to be joking, but I don't know, guys. Maybe he's not joking. By the way, I love Progressive Voices. It's all just Progressive Voices outside of my show, and Majority Report is my favorite left commentator on YouTube, hands down.
Calling from a 978 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Who's this?
This is Maddie from Massachusetts.
Hello, Maddie. What's on your mind?
Actually, first, I want to do a shout out to Matt. I love you, Matt. I'm a patron of your podcast.
Oh, thank you very much.
I am calling today to talk about my personal experience with pharmaceutical price gouging.
Uh-huh.
So it's a bit of an older story, but I wasn't listening to you guys in 2016 when this was all going on. And I think that it's still relevant today. Essentially, do you guys remember Valiant Pharmaceuticals? That company was involved along with Martin Shkreli et al.
Yes.
Do you remember?
Yeah, Valiant was that his company, or was that the company that he bought the drug from?
Oh, no. So Valiant's a separate company. Martin Shkreli became really notable for what he did to the drug Daraprim. But Valiant Pharmaceuticals was found to have really been like the biggest culprit who did pharmaceutical price gouging as part of their like explicit corporate strategy. The story of Valiant, or the rise and fall of Valiant, was really big in like the business and financial press. Essentially, the stock peaked at like $250 a share, and then there was a huge scandal about the price gouging, and their stock price fell to below $10 a share. I'm calling because I have something called Wilson's disease, and I take a drug, Cyprine, that Valiant Pharmaceuticals produces, that is cited as like the most egregious example of pharmaceutical price gouging in the industry. So in the 2016 report from the Senate Committee on Aging, the Martin Shkreli's Daraprim was like the -- example, and Cyprine, which is what I take, was like the next most egregious example of pharmaceutical price gouging. Throughout the 90s and up to about 2005, Merck was producing the drug for $1 a pill. I started on it in about 2010, and it was at the time $4 a pill. Shortly after I started on it, Valiant Pharmaceuticals acquired the company that was producing the drug, specifically so that it could own Cyprian, the drug that I take. By 2015, so only 10 years later, they were charging over $200 a pill for something that in 2005 was $1 a pill. Yes. And just to clarify as well, this is a medication that the standard dose is 4 pills a day. I'm on a little bit above the standard dose. I'm on 6 pills a day. And everybody who takes this drug needs it to stay alive, and needs to take it every day. So the actual annual bill in 2015 and relevant still today is over $300,000 a year for the average patient to get their medication.
That's nuts. That's nuts. And
something that for something that in 2015 or in 2005 was $1,500.
When was this pill developed?
The late 60s. It's off patent, and it has been off patent throughout the whole time that Valiant owned it. Valiant put $0 into R&D for this drug, nor did Valiant put any money into R&D for any of the drugs that they sell. Their explicit corporate strategy was to acquire smaller drug companies through mergers and acquisitions, strip out their research and development arms, and then price hike on everything.
Wow. It's just absurd. I mean, it's just totally absurd. In this instance, I think, Elizabeth Warren has a proposal where the U.S. government would produce, because at this point it's probably it could be generic in form, right? I mean, it's off patent.
Right. So it's been off patent. There are a lot of problems with the pharmaceutical drug industry. Part of the reason why this medication costs so much and why Valiant specifically targeted it is because there are probably no more than 5,000 patients on this medication throughout the whole United States. And the disease also doesn't affect us really day to day as long as we stay on the medication. It's serious, but it's manageable as long as we're medicated. So there's no organizing operation or awareness. There's a small organization called the Wilson's Disease Association.
What do you gotta just change your phone, because the way you're talking right now makes it hard to hear. But go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay. So the Wilson's Disease Association is the patient advocacy and organization for the disease, and because it doesn't really affect us, it has very little strength. It doesn't really have many operations, and Valiant knew this when they sought out this drug, because they knew that there wasn't going to be collective action already as sort of built into the patient base.
It's so the amount of evil involved in every step of this process is it's stunning. I mean, I don't use that word
market
too
logic,
loosely, but it is
market logic.
Yes, it is. It's the market logic, but it is to actually sit there and come up with oh, look, all we got to do is find a group of people that we can exploit who don't have the political power. I mean, to have this level of intelligence, but that lack of humanity is pretty stunning. But my understanding is in these situations, under Warren's proposal, anyways, you would create some type of agency that would be akin to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that wouldn't necessarily need a large political constituency to point this out. And then you set in basically certain parameters, and then the government starts to manufacture a drug like this.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be real progress. I mean, obviously Medicare for All would also make considerable progress towards making this better, in that there would be a single buyer. And so the government would be able to set prices that are less outrageous than what we're currently paying.
I mean, frankly, from my perspective, there is something better than setting the prices for a drug when a drug is off patent. In particular, I mean, patents, obviously a function of the Constitution, we have to have it to some degree, but I mean, we don't have to have them as long as they are, A, and B, once it's off patent, I say when you pass a threshold like this, you could set it up like the Voting Rights Act, basically. Like when there is a past record of abuse on a drug like this, boom, automatically becomes a product that the government has authorization to produce, and they just start producing it. And so not only you don't have to have the cost, the price set. The price is exactly what it costs to produce it. Period. End of story. And then the drug is out there.
Seize the means of production.
Absolutely. One more thing that I just wanted to say about this. The reason I decided to call in is you had that guest on last week who talked about public-private partnerships in the public health field. And so with Valiant specifically, after the scandal and their stock price tanked and they were called Pharmaceutical Enron, they decided that the best way to buy good PR would be to make a donation to the Wilson's Disease Association. So they made a donation to the Wilson's Disease Association of $100,000 and then went on quarterly earnings calls and bragged about their partnership. To be very clear, $100,000 is less than the profit they make on me alone in 6 months.
Appreciate the story. It's just unbelievable. Thank you so much.
But we need the wealthy drug companies because they donate to charity.
Yeah, medical profiteers are the worst people.
Thanks again for the call.
This also...
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for taking my call.
It's a bit tangential, but I actually interviewed Jamila Mishner on my show as well, and she was on this show a couple months ago. People should listen to both interviews. She's in that book on the history of Medicaid and federalism is one of the best books that one can read on healthcare and race and also the states' rights scam. But after working, we worked through this history, and then she said, even on the other end of it, some of the people in her ethnography are people who are, they're outliers, but they actually made $1 million a year and went bankrupt because they had a kid who, it was like kid's born, and the doctor's basically like, to keep this child alive is going to be $200,000 a year.
Right.
So she was saying, in our healthcare system, unless we have a Medicare for all system, unless you're Jeff Bezos, you're not safe. Period.
Calling from a 214 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
No,
I'm just joking.
Right.
No, it's Bradley from Austin. Forget about that start. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Your hat's going for a second there.
I understand. The temptation is sometimes the temptation is just far too great. But thank you, Bradley.
You have a Sam impression,
It wasn't
Bradley?
even close.
You have a Sam impression, Bradley? Sam impression?
No, I don't have a Sam impression.
All right.
No.
Well, what do you got, Bradley? Let's move forward.
Yeah, it didn't go so well. So I'm actually calling to talk about impeachment, and it's not impeachment of Trump, actually. One of the things that I think is difficult about impeachment is that you would have had to have laid the groundwork, and kind of done constant, procedural war, public relations, laying the groundwork for a long time in order to get to a point where impeachment was feasible. So I don't necessarily disagree with Pelosi's, position on this, but I don't understand why we're not looking at impeachment for lower level officials like Nielsen. And potentially, if Kavanaugh lied to the Supreme Court during his confirmation hearing, I don't know why we're not looking into that really closely. And that's my question for you guys.
I think it's a good question. I think that, my guess is from a political standpoint. Look, my feeling on impeachment in terms of Donald Trump is all like political questions aside about that, the bottom line is if this guy wins re-election, you're going to want the opportunity to impeach him then. And if you impeach him now, you will not get a conviction in the Senate. And if he gets reelected, which is, if he runs, possibility greater than zero, you're going to want to retain that ability to impeach him in 2021, because otherwise the guy functions with a total sense of impunity. And that, I suspect, would be pretty dangerous. Why I think they don't impeach, Nielsen is, I think it's going to be super hard to get evidence out of the White House. You're going to have to go and subpoena stuff from the executive branch. And I think the idea is probably some semblance of, the return on investment is not there. That you're not, I think, look, there is plenty to be sniffing around in terms of Supreme Court justices, not just Kavanaugh, frankly, but frankly, Thomas and the relationship between, cases that he sat on and where his wife works is a huge conflict. Now, there is no technically a conflict statute that affects the Supreme Court, but I just think the return on investment is not there. That would be the calculus, I guess. But I agree with you. I think that, broadly speaking, you got to hold these people to account. We didn't do it with the Bush administration. It came back to bite us in the ass. It is, like this whole day in some respects has just been like a litany of things that we've done that have come back to bite us in the ass. And then just add to it things that we haven't done in terms of holding people to account come back to bite us in the ass. But there's also a common theme, and I appreciate the phone call. And that is that, when I say we, look, there were very narrow interests whose interests were probably perfectly satiated by the moves that we did in the 1950s, the so-called post-colonial era, or stuff that we did in the 80s in Central America. Things didn't work out so well for maybe the United States, didn't work out so well maybe for the inhabitants of certain countries, and didn't work out so well for people who were sent to fight in wars. But it probably did work out pretty well for those people who had financial interests, because, that's the way this goes. Who is this? Is this
Betsy McKay?
Oh, McCaughey.
McCaughey.
Oh, I think she, if I'm not mistaken,
woman helped sink Clinton care.
Yes,
this is a long-term anti-healthcare propaganda.
Oh, yes. She really doesn't like people to have health care. And it was, and she was very disingenuous, too, if I remember correctly. But here is Betsy McCaughey talking about fake asylum seekers. Now, let me tell you what happens to fake asylum seekers. They go through the process. Their asylum claim is adjudicated. And I don't know what a fake asylum seeker is, but if their claim is not significant enough to get asylum, guess what happens to them? They don't get asylum. This is like, I don't know. This is like saying people who go to a job interview, like I'm going to apply for a job. Well, you're a fake job interviewee because you didn't get the job.
And very few people get asylum who apply for it, by the way.
And this administration has narrowed the number of things that can qualify as legitimate claims, like let's say you're being beaten domestically and there is no judicial infrastructure in your home country to deal with it. That is no longer a valid claim. Let's say you are being threatened by gangs. Remember that? Threatened by gangs? That is no longer a valid claim for asylum. But here is Betsy McCaughey. God, I don't even know how she handles it. All the fake asylum seekers. It must be just horrible for her.
Right, politicians are not leveling with us about what we're already being forced to spend to shelter the illegal immigrants coming across the southern border, most of them falsely claiming to be asylum seekers. The numbers are staggering, in fact, so staggering that deterring this crossing, this asylum scam, would more than pay for the wall in less than 2 years. No other public infrastructure project would get paid back so fast.
In 2 years. Let's look at some of the...
There you go. The fake asylum. I mean, just the absurdity of these claims are just stunning. And the inhumanity of them is really the only thing that sort of puts them in any type of relief.
Yeah, and the government doesn't have to pay to house people in freezing cold detention centers, right? They could let them out on parole. They could not treat people like criminals who are going through a legal process. Our producer, Andy, spoke with someone at an NGO who helps people seeking asylum, and it's just insane, like the number of hoops they make you jump through that are absolutely intended to make you give up every step of the way. Like, they don't get a court-appointed lawyer. They don't get any help with translation services. They have to fill out all the forms in English and do the interview in English. And these are all things meant to dissuade people, and often they do.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's nuts. Let's go to the phones. We'll take calling from a 570 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Joe calling from Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Joe
Can you hear
from
me?
Yes, Joe from Scranton. What's on your mind, Joe?
Hey, well, real quick, I'm fairly new. I've been listening to you guys, I guess, for about 2 years, but finally I subscribed to both to you and Michael. And I know sometimes you're interested in.
How did you come to listen to the show?
Well, you know what? Funny enough, let's see. I'm about 39 years old, so I was looking for on YouTube one day for Janine Garofalo. I always had a little bit of a crush on her and wondered what she was up to these days. And I didn't even know about the whole Air America, because that kind of, I don't know, must have missed me. But I don't think we didn't get Air America where I was going to college. I really wasn't paying attention to politics at that time. So that's when I started and I found your show. And ever since then, I mean, I've been well educated, more so than in college in many ways. But and then for the subscription, here I am listening for 2 years, and I'll tell you what did it for me. One day, my cable bill is probably about $150, $160 every month. And the one day, my middle child wanted to watch, I think it was Mary Poppins. I went over and tried to get it up for him on the movie, and all of a sudden it said like $19.99. It was an extra $19.99, and I'm thinking, I'm already paying $150. They want an extra $20. I'm like, you know what? I got money for this garbage, and I don't have money for these guys that I listen to every single day. Come on.
Well,
so that's what did it for me.
I appreciate the attitude. I almost want to clip that, actually, if you don't mind. Maybe we'll use that as an ad.
Feel free.
All right.
Feel free. But
deal.
I just wanted to say, coming from Scranton, Pennsylvania, I'm afraid that maybe people might be underestimating Joe Biden and his. I know it was said before that sometimes there's nobody really running that has the same kind of with any charisma. Joe Biden has a very special brand of charisma that people definitely in Scranton. This is one of Scranton is in Lackawanna County in Pennsylvania, and it was one of the counties that did manage to remain Democratic. I think it's because we have a paper ballot, but many people around here did switch, that they voted for Obama and then they switched parties completely to vote for Trump. That phenomenon happened around here big time.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that Joe Biden is definitely going to recapture those people. Those strange people that you say, like, how in the world is it that they voted for Obama, but then they voted for Trump? Biden will snatch them back up in a second. And it's just going to be, people view him around here like he's Bing Crosby, the Bells of St. Mary's. They respond to that kind of, oh, honey, how are you? I just set a match for your mother. Let me touch you on the back and caress your cheek. And people have been beaten down emotionally so bad by Trump that there's a lot of people that I know will respond to that kind of emotional connection that some people feel.
I
with that
agree
kind of
with.
like old
I've been
Irish
trying to
uncle.
say that for a long
Good.
time. Like Joe Biden, it doesn't speak to us on any number of levels, but he has a lot of charisma, and I think, like, again, I've never been naive. If he was the general election candidate, he would destroy Donald
Yeah,
Trump.
no. If you can abstract away
So-
from the policies, he has a
But
lot of
that's what we're-
populist appeal.
That's what we're talking about. So I think, that's a
Yes.
super valid concern. Yeah.
But I guess the question would be,
and
are those
unfortunately
guys
that-
going to be effective in the primary?
Well, I think I think that's the thing with Biden. Is I think the primary is a landmine for him, and then I think the general would be super easy. But I think the real question is how does it play out in the primary? Because I think even in the primary, there's plenty of people.
But didn't Bernie win the primary there last time around? Am I mistaken?
Pennsylvania, no.
No.
Okay,
no,
never
no,
mind.
No, he did. No,
he won
did not.
Michigan.
Yeah.
Now, so now let me give me your sense of like what people would think about like Kamala Harris or Beto or Bernie.
I think it's going to be Bernie or Elizabeth Warren. I would have to say it would probably be Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and then Bernie Sanders in this
Interesting.
area. Unfortunately,
Why
Now, listen,
why
I
Warren
know,
over Bernie? That's
but
interesting.
A lot of people don't know the policies.
But
Oh, I'm sorry, say
why?
that again?
How does Warren connect with people there that Bernie doesn't in that respect? I mean, I'm interested because Warren doesn't always strike me as but is it just sort of like they're looking like the Midwestern quality that she has?
They're looking for, well, again, I mean, since I'm listening to you guys, I mean, it really is that nobody knows anything about anything.
Right. Of course. We're just getting your opinion. You live there, and I'm just curious.
So you're going to get like the let's say, I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but a lot of like the retired teacher, maybe like, hey, you know what, Elizabeth Warren, we needed a woman last time. I like her. And and I don't want to make it seem like, they're just going to, but there really is. Like, that would be the hierarchy for sure, would be, Joe Biden, people respond. And like you said at the beginning of the show, when he came out and he said, well, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. That kind of like, that is the first thing that a Catholic says if they're going into the confessional. So in other words, he's confessing to everybody, well, here is my sin. I'm guilty of talking to the Republicans.
Right.
People, they love that shit. They eat it up. He'd be first. She'd be second. Bernie, yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, there's not that much of a younger population around here. So, I mean, yeah, the younger you get, for sure, yes, they would be on board for Bernie. But there's just not in northeastern Pennsylvania. It really just doesn't have that kind of a younger population.
Interesting. Well, that's fascinating. I guess we'll see, and maybe we'll start to see some polling, and we'll keep an eye open for that. But I think you are right, particularly with the type of sort of demographic that you're talking about. Older, more blue collar. Joe Biden, connects with folks like that because of his, I think, demeanor and whatnot. And this just goes into chapter 8 of my Blame the Electorate, because
Blaming
they don't
the
actually
electorate.
have any sense of policies.
I appreciate that though, because
Honestly, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. One more.
No, I was just going to say, the only thing that surprises me about Biden, really, honestly, genuinely surprises me, is that he didn't announce on St. Patrick's Day. And you're going to be shocked to see how many people dig themselves up from the grave, from the Irish graveyards, to go and vote for Joe Biden like he's one of the last remaining Kennedys. That's the only thing that
There you have
I think,
it.
unfortunately, we might be
Joe
missing.
Biden is going to do some electoral fraud. Thank you.
Joe
for the
Biden, in addition to being a
Appreciate
very,
the call.
very low IQ individual, is digging up dead bodies. These are the things you hear.
Can you?
I'm hearing it all over the place.
Can you pull this? No, I don't. This
This
is
is very
unsubstantiated. Somebody, I saw this actually last night, and
totally
I totally forgot about
unprompted.
it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of people are out there. The new libertarians out there are talking about, Sam Seder. He's not libertarian enough to run in the election. Let me tell you something. I'm more libertarian than anybody who's running in the would run in the race if I were to run in the race.
I've talked to
My
non-libertarians. Hashem, forgive me.
I am exactly. I've talked to non-libertarians. And forgive me, I have a version of libertarianism that we've been developing here for years, and maybe I'll come out with it publicly, maybe I won't. If I do decide to run for the libertarian presidential race, and I do decide to run, I will unveil my platform. I am in consultation with various folks about my social democratic libertarianism. I am a utilitarian social democratic libertarian, but also with some touches. I mean, and I don't want to be held to that. Because we're still working on the definition, because the definition of it is very important. I know a lot of people are going to just jump on certain words in there and say, and are going to make a big hay of it, but I don't want to be taken out of context. Now, with that said, there has been a new poll that has been released, and frankly, I don't know the validity of this poll. I saw it was retweeted by Adam Kokesh. It is done. Who does the polling on this?
Let's see. Yeah, third-party watch.
Third-party watch. Now, I don't know this thing, and so I cannot vouch for this, and we haven't checked it. All I'm saying is that somebody has posted this, and it is a 2020 Green and Libertarian primary polling. From March 10th to the 14th, polled a total of 1,231 registered voters from the Green and Libertarian parties on their opinions on all declared candidates running for the presidential nomination of the respective party. Now, I have yet to officially declared my nomination, so I don't know. But
I'm more libertarian than anybody who might run.
And here is the result of the polling. I come
is this
in,
name
scroll
recognition?
up. This could be just name recognition.
You're the Biden of the libertarian field.
There are 5 names that are in the polling: Avron Vohra, Vermin Supreme, John McAfee, Adam Kokesh, and Sam Seder. And I have just read them in the reverse order in which they are listed in this poll. I came in first with 42.74%. Now, a lot of this could be name recognition, or it could be an appreciation of my sense of strong civil libertarian values combined with a sense of a deep, abiding desire to have freedom. Almost 4 different types of freedoms, if you will, which I, of course, will, in the event that I do run, I will be more specific about.
Are you building this around a 4 freedoms concept?
But freedom is crucial as Americans, as human beings.
Freedom's a beauty. It's a big deal.
But we will discuss more of this. But it is an interesting thing, and I can tell you that this polling result, whether it is actually from an actual polling outfit or just some guy who mocked it up online,
there's some interesting crosstabs.
Do we know for a fact that this is real? This just looks like a Google spreadsheet.
You never know with the Libertarian
yeah,
Party.
I feel like it's hard to tell with Libertarian sort of deployed things.
Could
but
just be a website.
They have the sample size.
In the Green Party, they don't even have Jill Stein.
Is she not running?
I don't know.
It's time to make way for
But-
future leadership.
but I
Other
can-
people can get 0.5%.
But I can tell you that this poll, whether it's real or not, is going to weigh heavily in my decision.
Well, so there was 309 women surveyed, Sam. You got 166 of them.
Wow.
Now, there was 548 white people versus 73 black people. You got 34 of them. So, again, the other competition was Kokesh and McAfee. So you're doing pretty well with a lot of the I guess the non-traditional libertarian vote.
Right?
That's the concern. You're polling very well with non-libertarian voters. Does that undermine your electoral calculus?
I mean, I'm doing better I'm doing pretty good even with the With the white population.
Well, Kokesh is beating you with men.
Right. Okay.
That
makes sense.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. That makes sense.
And then
I mean,
we
this
have
is
the billionaire software developer and alleged murderer John McAfee in the race. Only in the Libertarian Party, folks.
I will say
that documentary about
these
John
numbers,
McAfee in Belize is actually hugely disturbing.
These numbers are consistent with internal polling that we have. So I would just say that, but I don't know if these numbers are real. I just wanted to put it out there. I will be making a decision within a certain amount of time. So I can assure you, stay tuned into this area, and I will be making a decision soon. Calling from a 301 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 301.
Hey, guys, I guess that's me. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay. Hey, I was actually calling for a different reason, but I was listening to the show, and I hate to be obnoxious, but I'm pretty disappointed that you were applauding the egg on the senator's head. I mean, applauding any kind of violence, as little as it is very dangerous. We're incredibly polarized.
Wait a second. What constitutes violence for you? Does hate speech constitute violence? Does saying things that cause people to be killed or add to an environment where people are killed, does that constitute violence?
You're talking about free speech and like Nazis saying obnoxious things and all that.
Well, I mean, I don't
right?
think Australia has the same concept of free speech, but yes, does free speech constitute violence? Can free speech constitute? Does free speech constitute violence in your mind?
If you were talking about hurting people, yes.
Okay.
If you were openly saying, I think that this group should be murdered, hurt, expelled.
What if I say that this group is their presence is justification for them to be murdered?
I don't, man. I don't think that's the same as actually physically hitting somebody,
Okay.
whether it be an egg or anything else.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, and look, we can agree to disagree on that.
Right.
It's upsetting, right? I really think
totally
we gotta be careful with applauding
Yeah,
any kind of violence.
And when what happens on after Halloween? Do you go out and do a candlelight vigil with all the people who are throwing eggs and shaving cream cars and whatnot?
Okay. Some guys are throwing eggs at the house. It's far different than hitting somebody in the head with an egg. So I mean,
Wait a second. Throwing an egg at somebody is different than hitting them with an egg.
A teenager throwing an egg at a house, okay?
What if they throw an egg at a
far
person?
different.
What if they throw an egg at a person?
That's violence. That's not okay. They should be arrested and for assault. That's just, you don't attack people, dude. Like, we don't do that in a modern progressive society where we want the world to be a better place. That's all I'm saying. I mean,
Okay.
and look,
well, we have a difference of opinion
I'm
as to
quote-unquote
how dangerous egg throwing is at people and who deserves it. But that's fine. Okay, so we differ in that respect.
Okay. Well, if I've got one more question, I'd like to ask that also.
Sure.
Or you guys can get on.
Sure.
The ballot harvesting
Just
thing.
be careful.
I know there was.
Hold on. Just be careful, because some questions I find to be rather violent. But go ahead.
No,
Did you notice the senator punching this
come
kid in
on,
the
Russ.
face?
Don't be so sensitive. I was just making a joke. Now,
I would
please
actually
continue.
say that throwing an egg in an old lady's house is way worse than doing it to a fucking prominent global fascist. I'm sorry. I know we put this aside, but I'm a little offended by how dumb this argument is. man.
But go ahead. I mean, that's the hill you want to plant your flag. It's okay to throw eggs at old ladies' houses, but not to throw an egg at a big strapping man.
Who punched the kid in the face? Who punched the kid in the face? And then the kid was held in a chokehold. Like, even if I accepted your wuss bag ridiculous argument, you're not even focusing on the big picture.
Okay.
You don't hit children. Like, that's disgusting too.
Right.
It's all disgusting. Violence is disgusting.
Okay.
It's
All
something that
right.
we
So
should
fine.
all
So fine. That's his opinion. All right. Go ahead. Continue.
Okay. The ballot harvesting. just help me understand why that these are one of the things I feel like there should be bipartisan support for, right? Like, we don't want people touching other people's ballots. We are in a polarized society. To crumble the faith in democracy is dangerous. But I'm under the impression that Democrats are not as concerned with it, and I'm legitimately asking the reasons why, because it seems to me like a clear, like, easy bipartisan thing. Like, hey, let's not touch other people's ballots. The voting process is sacred.
So you're saying that when people go around with secure bags in California and take sealed envelopes in which the ballots are the only way that they're considered valid, right? And deliver them, that's problematic.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous. Isn't that the scandal in North Carolina? Wasn't it with ballot harvesting?
Well, I mean, they brought them in, and then there was no chain of custody at all, and there was a whole raft of corruption. And yes, those people are going to go to jail.
That's all I'm saying is I feel like it lends itself to corruption, especially when we're so upset in the country these days. I mean, like, I don't think there's ever been a time we're more politically polarized. Like, I think they've done polls. It's worse than religion, right? I mean, people.
Dude, you know what I find fascinating? Like we have, right? We have a huge record of systemic moves by state legislatures and governors of multiple states to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of people of voting. We have a Supreme Court that signed off on this. You know the story of Texas, right? Where the Supreme Court found that the redistricting done by the state of Texas was racially motivated and was therefore completely illegitimate. And what happened was the way that these districts were maintained and these laws were maintained was because the state legislature readopted these laws. And because they didn't actually draw them, an earlier state legislator did, the Supreme Court said they were then okay. Now, for you to focus on imaginary problems, hypothetical problems, right? We both agree these are hypothetical because we know what happened in North Carolina and we know they were caught. So you're talking about hypothetical problems with voting, but right in front of you, you can see that this Supreme Court signed off on districts that they said themselves was racist because of a technicality about the state of Texas ignoring those and then readopting them. So you got to look and say, what are my priorities and why? In fact, let me ask you, why is that your priority?
I can easily explain that. Number one, I'm not as well versed with that. Number two, I'm calling into a progressive show because I'm calling into a progressive show to get progressive answers. I call into conservative shows to call them on that bullshit. And I would call and say, hey guys, this is absurd. You quote unquote claim to be conservatives, yet you're completely turning your face to racist acts. And I will look at that one and I will call into a conservative show and I'll ask the same thing, right? Like, I call into shows to ask questions that I don't know the answer to.
Well, listen.
Based on views that I don't agree with.
Listen. Let me tell you what would happen if somebody raised their hand and they were watching a surgery, and the surgeon was like saying, like, okay, here's the heart. As you can see, there's a blockage to the heart, and somebody raised their hand and said, "Excuse me, doctor, what about that hangnail?" Let me tell you what the surgeon would say. Are you serious? Excuse me, I've got some work to do. Good day, sir. But I appreciate it,
nothing.
Russ. I mean, I think
apparently that senator's Facebook's messages are open, and I don't know if this would be okay with the caller because obviously it'd be very upsetting. But you can DM him images of eggs. Just a thought.
It's symbolic violence, Michael.
It's symbolic violence. What a fucking idiot caller.
I just think
Sorry,
that I just think that like the priorities are messed up.
That's the priorities are very revealing.
That's the priorities are. And I'm not, I can, I'm willing to have all sorts of debates, but when your starting point is just pedantic nonsense, it's not even pedantic, just nonsense. What are you doing?
Like there's a It just, I think, this notion that somehow you want to situate yourself in the middle so that you're not in any way tainted by whatever it is. Like, just you should be spending a lot more time calling conservative shows.
Mm-hmm.
Deal with the hundreds of thousands of people who are systemically been deprived of the right of vote, rather than the hypothetical notion that the idea that in California, where there is very specific laws that in California, I assume this is where he's talking about, right? No, but it was California is where he's talking about the ballot harvesting, right? Is like that's the whole thing, is that the notion that people are going out there and finding absentee ballots, because a vote by mail voter, and this is the law in California, who is unable to return the ballot may designate any person to return the ballot to an elections official from whom it came, and so. The theory is that, well, you're going to have all these partisan people are going to have control of the ballot, but presumably the voter is going to say, like, well, who sent you? Now, I guess maybe the election, the collector could be lying, but how would they have their name? I mean, it's just like what would be involved for the sort of the systemic throwing of an election that could be undetected. Right? Because in California, in one congressional district, it was detected. So I don't know if, like, the theory is like, well, you could turn the election in this way in California for the president or like the state. I guess it's conceivable in like a town council thing. I guess that's conceivable, but I don't know. All right, we don't have time for one more call. Calling from a 416 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Eric from Toronto.
Eric from Toronto, what's on your mind?
Well, first I wanted to say first time, long time. Thank you for taking my call. Hi to Jamie, Matt, and you, Sam.
Thank you. Not to Michael. I appreciate that.
Hello.
Well, hello. Yeah, actually, a few things came up in those series of conversations, so my heart goes out to the missed your name, but dealing with the medical, with the price gouging and everything.
Right.
It's a total scam. The for-profit system, obviously, it's just a killer. And any half-step measures, to try to stop it, obviously just fall short. And I appreciate the fight that you guys are putting to, catch up with the rest of the modern world.
We're trying.
It's a tough system.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyways, I have a question. What do you think progressives should pardon that. Sorry. When it comes in terms to corporate media, they are like time after time an obstacle for progressive change. Is there an issue, or aren't, like, I was saying for years before before Donald Trump stole the tagline from me, corporate media is the enemy of the people. Obviously it's a harsh generalization, but
right.
There's a lot of truth to it. Is there any contradictions, or is there like any way where, like, maybe as Con was saying on Michael's program, to like shift the support closer to our side? I don't know.
I mean, I
kind
think,
of rambling, a little nervous.
Well, look, I think there is. I think corporate media is going to. Well, I don't know, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't hold much faith in corporate media providing any type of leadership on this type of stuff. I mean, I think there are two things that are important developments that will mitigate what you're talking about. Well, three things, really, and let me let you go and answer them. One is a proper antitrust regime would break up a lot of these entities, and there wouldn't be such concentration. You wouldn't have such concentrated money owning it. Two, social media is going to continue to diminish the power of corporate media, particularly to set a narrative, right? I mean, they're going to be too often, or not too often, but more often, they are now following a narrative that is developed on social media. Money still plays an outside, role in that, but it has less of an ability to control things there. And and three, I think to some extent, as generations change, things may change a little bit. But the big problem, and let me add another one for Democrats, as Democrats change, I don't think corporate media, the big danger with corporate media, it seems to me, is sort of like creating false narratives as to where the country is on certain policy issues, and it being a feedback loop more often than not to Democrats than Republicans, because Republicans at this point have been running against the media they've been doing it for a long time, but they've been doing it in a more concerted effort really in the past 30 years, I would say. And Democrats, too often, there's that dynamic that I think it was Paul Waldman that was talking about, that Ben Wickler had mentioned, the former communications guy in Move On, that Democrats, see these mainstream corporate narratives and they buy them. And sometimes, it's nefarious. Sometimes it's just out of sheer ignorance. But it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in some respect. And I think we're going to see a lot less of that when you have people like a lot of the freshmen that we talk about in the Democratic congressional class who are just like, we don't care what they say on the Sunday talk shows. It doesn't factor in. And when you have a certain number of them who are going out there and on a daily basis proving that it doesn't matter, that's very powerful. So,
yeah, they know how to post. They communicate directly with their audiences.
And they're not intimidated by what the mainstream, not only do they bypass that in terms of communicating to people, but they also don't say like, Chuck Todd this weekend said that it's really going out on a limb for this. And they don't care about that. But I think there's a lot of Democrats who still do. So it's very helpful. All right, folks. We are out of time. I apologize to our many, many callers hanging on the line, but we are out of time.
Especially because of some of the calls today that perhaps there was some time spent on. We doubly apologize.
Well, I wouldn't say that about Ronald Reagan. That's not nice.
Oh.
All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted